Hello and welcome to our 21st session, and this session is a continuation from our 10th, 11th and 12th session. So if you recall, in our 10th, 11th and 12th session, we talked about how we actually conceptualize the game, how we put our idea on a paper by preparing the design documents, and we also discussed about project management and teamwork. From session 13 to 20, we built a hungry game where we feed food to the animals. Let us reverse engineer this game. How basically we develop or conceptualize games like this. It all starts with our design document, and after we prepare our design document, we actually build something called as a prototype. And when we build this prototype, instead of the actual models, we use simple primitive shapes. So in this session, we are going to start from our session 13, where we had prepared the design document for this deer game or this food feeding game. From the design document, how do we develop the prototype? That we are going to discuss it in this session. We are going to start our prototyping with a new project. I will double click on this Unity Hub to launch Unity Hub, come into the project, and I am going to start with a new project. I am going to choose the default Universal 3D SRP as the template, and in the project name, I am going to call this as Feeding Game Prototype. And then in eUnity project, I will click on Create Project. Let us open our project design. Let us open our project design document that we created for this animal feeding game. And based on this document, we are going to first decide what all objects are required in our scene. So based on this document now coming back to Unity where we have launched our new project, I will come into the inspector and I will remove this readme assets, and here in the confirm window click on proceed. Then I will come into the project panel, and in the scenes I am going to select this sample scene, right click, and I am going to rename this as deer_game prototype. And you can see this is the scene which is open, and right now I have a main camera, direction, light and global volume. Now based on our document, the very first thing I need in my game is I need a ground. So first I am going to create a ground. I am going to come into the hierarchy, right click, come into 3D object, and I am now going to create a plane, and I am going to call this plane as ground. I will come into the inspector, and in the transform I will click on this right 3 dot and I will reset it to 0, 0, 0. This ground is small. I want to use a bigger ground area. So I will come here into scale, and along the X I will scale it by 5 units. Along the Z I am going to scale it by 5 units. Instead of giving highly detailed forest or desert material to this, I am going to add a simple material to this ground. So I will come into the asset, right click, and I am going to create a new folder, and I am going to call this as materials. And in this I will right click, and in create I will create a new material, and I am going to call this as ground. And coming into the inspector, in the surface input base map, I will click here and select dark brown color. I will close this color picker, drag this ground and attach it to my ground object. Now in the project window in materials ground, I will right click and I am going to rename this as ground material here, or I will just add ground mat. Now based on the design document, the next object that we are going to use it in our scene is the player. So to represent player, I will come into the hierarchy, right click, and I am going to come into the 3D object, and I am going to add a capsule as my player. And this capsule I am going to call this as player, and for this player I am going to create a material. So I will come into the materials, right click, create material. I am going to call this as player mat. I will choose a different color. I choose some blue tint color for the player. Then I will drag this player mat and attach it to the player. Select the player, come into the inspector. In the transform, I will set its location to 0, 0, 0. And if I press F, half of this capsule is below the ground. To place it above the ground, in the inspector, it has a scale of 1. So in the position along the y-axis, I will move it by 1 unit. The player is exactly over the ground. I am going to convert this player into a prefab. So I will come into my project panel, asset, right click. I am going to create new folder, and I am going to call this as my prefab. I will now drag my player and add it into my prefab. Based on my design document, apart from this player, I also need animals which are going to span towards the player. I am going to represent every animal as S cube. I will come into the hierarchy, right click, come into the 3D object, and I am going to create a cube, and I am going to call this as animal 1. Come into the inspector, and in transform I will reset its position to 0, 0, 0, and along the y axis I will move it by 0.5 so that it is over the ground. I will come into the materials, right click and create a new material, and I am going to call this as animal 1 mat. Come into the inspector, and in surface input base map I will click on this color, and I am going to select an yellow color. Now I will drag this animal 1 mat and attach it to this animal 1. Now I want this animal 1 also as a prefab. I will drag this from the hierarchy panel to my project panel and put it into my prefabs folder. So now this has been converted into a prefab. With this animal 1 selected, I will come into the scene view, and along the Z axis I will move it in the forward direction and place it at a distance of 6 units. I will come into the hierarchy, right click, and I am now going to create a 3D object cube, and I am going to call this as animal 2. For animal 2, I will come into the inspector, and in transform, come on the right edge, and I will reset it to 0, 0, 0, and then in position along the Y, I will move it by 0.5. Come into the materials, right click, and I am going to create a new material. I am going to call this as animal 2 mat, and coming into the inspector, surface input on the base color, I will click here, and I am going to select a purple color here like this. I will drag this animal 2 mat, and I will drag it and put it on animal 2. Now I will convert this animal 2 also as a prefab. So I will drag it from my hierarchy panel and put it into my prefab. Coming back to hierarchy, I select this animal. I will move it along the Z axis by 6 units, and along the X axis I will move it to the side and place it around -5 units. I want one more animal. So in the hierarchy, I will come here and I will right click. I will come into the 3D object, and I am going to add a cube, and now I am going to call this as animal 3. I will come into the inspector, in transform I will reset it to 0, 0, 0, and since its scale is 1, along Y axis I will move it by 0.5 to place it on the ground. Then come into the materials, right click, create a new material, and I am going to call this as animal 3 mat. And I will come into inspector, surface input, and in this color I am now going to select a cyan color, and I will close this. I will drag this animal 3 mat and attach it to animal 3. I will drag this animal 3 from the hierarchy window into my project window and put it inside my prefabs. I will come into the hierarchy window, select animal 3, and I will move it along the Z axis by 6 units, and along the X axis I will move it by 5 units. And apart from the 3 animals, according to my design document, I also need food item to span it at the animal. I will come into the hierarchy, right click, and I will come into the 3D object, and for the food item I am going to use a sphere, and I am going to call this as food. I will come into inspector panel, transform, and on the right hand corner click here and reset it to 0, 0, 0. I will also move this sphere along the Y axis by 0.5 to place it above the ground level. I will come into material, right click, create a new material. I am going to call this as food mat. Now with food mat selected, I will come to the inspector panel, and in the surface input I will click here, and now I am going to select red color here, close this color panel. I will drag this food mat material and drop it over the food. This food item also I have to convert it into a prefab. So from the hierarchy window, I will drag this and drop it into my prefabs. Now this is a prefab. Now coming back to the hierarchy window, I will select food. Along the Z axis, I will slightly move it forward and place it at a distance 2 units. We have all the items that is needed in our game ready. I have to set up my camera. If you come into our design document, you can see that in project concept we have designed this game as a top-down game. Now I have to choose my main camera and I have to set it position in such a way that I am seeing all these objects from the top view. The easiest way to do is if you come into the scene view and in this gizmo if you right click, I am now going to come into the top view. I will middle mouse click and adjust the view so that all my game objects are visible. So I will set what should be the size, scale, everything here, and once it is set, I will come into the hierarchy, select the main camera and come here into game object and choose the option align with view or press Ctrl+Shift+F. So now you can see my camera position is adjusted in such a way I have it from the top view. So I can come and retweak my camera position. Along the X I will set it to 0, along the Z I will set it to 3 and along the Y I will set it to 10, and it is rotated along the X axis by 90 degrees. So we have our view also ready. We have our prototype ready with all the assets, materials, prefabs, everything. A game designer is going to use the design document and create a layout of the game using the primitives as shown here. This will be then sent to the programmer. So especially in teamwork, a designer will be separate, the programmer will be a separate person, and to share this to the programmer, he is going to export this entire prototype as a package. So to export this, I will come here into the project panel and choose the assets folder. This contains all my components. Right click and here you have an option export as asset package. Click here and see that all is selected, and here enable include dependencies. You need not include scripts because as of now we have not added any script here. So I will switch off scripts and I am going to add all the dependencies and click on export. I am going to call this now as food game prototype design version 1 and I am going to save this. This entire package will be exported as a Unity package and this will be shared to the programming team. Now in our previous sessions, we had worked on one more game as a challenge, the dog and the ball game. Say for example, you are asked to prepare a prototype for this dog and ball game. Come to file, save as, coming into asset scenes. I am going to call this as dog ball game prototype. And in this case, in case of dog ball game, the balls are dropping from top to bottom, player is to the right, dog is running from left to right. So in this case, I will come into the scene view, right click on the gizmo and come into the free view. And if I move, we have this as the ground. I select the ground, press Ctrl D to duplicate it. I will select ground 2 in hierarchy, press F2 and I am going to call it as wall. And then along the x-axis, I will rotate it by minus 90 degree so that I can see the, along the x-axis, I will scale it by around 10 units. Or I will right click here and come into the right view. I will just zoom out. I will right click and disable perspective so that I have the correct view here. I will just right click and come into the free view to see this, and this is the wall. So the wall is on the other side. So I will just move the wall and place it closed like this. For the wall, I will come into the materials, right click, I will create a new material. I will call this as wall and I will keep the color as white only. I will drag it and attach it to this. If I right click, back view. So if I come into the back view and if I just right click a little and tilt like this. So this is the view that we have to provide for our game. So this will be the view and I will just move it like this. I will select the player, move it to the left. The player will be along this axis and along the Z axis I will move it back here and place it here like this. And these three are balls. I will select all these three animals which will be balls which will be dropping from the top. And this is the dog that will be spanned by the player. Select the ball also and I will set its value to 18 so that it is near my player. So I can now create a prototype like this with middle mouse click, adjust the view like this. Now select the main camera in the hierarchy, come into the game object and choose align to view. And now in your camera, you are going to have this view. I will go to file, and save this. And again, to export this, I can just come on the asset, right click, come to export as asset package. I will enable only include dependencies in this export package. Click on export, and I am going to now call this as food game dog game prototype version 1, and I am going to save this. In this session, we learned about how actually the designers are going to build the prototype. So with this, we are going to conclude this session, and we are next going to see this from the programmer's perspective. Now, when the programmer game logic designer receives this asset package, how he is going to implement the script. That part, we will have a glimpse of it in our next session.